I think you guys can hear me. Tonight we're gonna do two things. First, we're gonna test the new streaming settings, and that's because I tried to test them last night, but I kept having drop frames for some reason. So I was testing everything, and I didn't get around to streaming because I was testing basically all night. So it looks okay right now. We'll leave it at that. I'm not going to fudge with the setting anymore. We'll see how that goes. And then the second thing is, the one feedback item to my last stream was that it would be nice if I could explain a little bit more into detail for a beginner what Magic actually is and how these cards work. So I would like to start with that. And we're going to jump into the game right here. And we'll look at a Magic card. So in Magic the Gathering Arena, you have these deck lists, and a deck is a set of at least 60 cards. And so we could just add a deck to look at what a card looks like, basically. I'm going to turn off my camera for this one so that it is not in the way, because right now it is covering, it would be covering a area of the screen. Oh, I'm still on. Why am I still online? Oh, here we go. There goes the camera. And so I guess what we can start out with is that in Magic there's 5 colors. There is white, blue, black, red, and green. So these are the basic colors a Magic card can have. A card can have more than that, but most likely a card has one of these colors: white, blue, black, red, and green. There are colorless cards. I mean, Magic is a game of exceptions, right? Like, if you think about it, there's a basic set of rules, and then each card most likely specifies an exception on it to the basic rules. So each card basically is an addendum to the basic rule set of the game. That's where Magic gets its tactical depth from. Just because there are so many cards, so many exceptions to the rules, so many situations these can produce, and yada yada yada. So if we look at one card in particular, or look at the anatomy of a card, like these are white cards, but the same thing is true for black cards, blue cards, digital cards, manual cards, or like paper cards that you have in hand. The anatomy of a card in Magic is mostly the same. It has a name up top. This card here that is on screen is called Seal Away. On the top right, it lists the cost of a card. So most cards have a cost associated with them that is required for the card to be played, like so that this rule, exception, or card can come into play or do anything really. There's a cost involved. Most likely that's a cost in forms of mana. Mana is one of the main resources in Magic. I'll get to that later. Then we have this nice artwork filling up about half of the card, or maybe even more of that. For some artworks like Luminous Bonds, we have these called shiny or shimmery versions or whatever. In paper Magic, so to say, or in traditional Magic, you would have like foil cards. They would have like a foil layer on top of them where the artwork would shimmer differently than the standard version. There would be very rare, like, so to say. And in the digital version, because like they represent it as this moving around effect, foil, shimmery, whatever you want to call it. But as you can see, even these cards have the same anatomy. They have the name, the costs, then they have a card type. So the Luminous Bonds over here is an enchantment. It's also an aura. You have the set, the Magic set that this card was printed in. The M19 on the middle right here says that this is from the Magic the Gathering core set of 2019. These cards might appear might have been appeared earlier in a different set, might have been a reprint, it might have been the first time it occurred, but that basically gives you an idea of when this card was printed, or in which set this card appeared. And then there's a rules text. The rules text in here says enchanted creature can't attack or block. So this card goes on to a creature. There's other card types like creature, human, soldier. This guy has first strike and mentor, and there's sorceries, there's instants, and all of these cards or these types basically specify the rules associated with playing the card. One other important type of cards is lands. I mentioned mana earlier before, and lands is where most of the time a Magic player draws his resources from. So it's one of the resources. Your other resource could be your library. That's the amount of cards that you have available to play. Or your life counter. For the most part, each game starts with both players having 20 life points. And if your life points at any point in the game is reduced to 0, you lost. If your library, meaning the cards that you have available to play, at any point in the game is reduced to 0, and it's your turn to draw a card, like at the beginning of your turn, or due to the effect of another card, another rule exception, basically. And if you're supposed to draw a card and you can't, you lost the game. Like, it's not an instant loss. Like when your life points, like any time in the game when your life points get reduced to 0, you lost, regardless of what state the game is in. If your library is reduced to 0, you're not immediately losing the game, but you lost at the point in time when you're supposed to draw a card. So if there are a whole bunch of effects go off, and there's like a chain of effects to resolve, and at some point during this chains you lose all the cards in your library, but also your opponent's life points would be reduced to 0, for example, you can still win the game even though you don't have a library anymore. So it gets fairly complicated fairly quickly, so to say. And it might be a little bit overwhelming for a beginner to understand all this. There's certainly more than what I just rambled on in the last 5 minutes. But those are basically that's basically Magic at its core, or the anatomy of a card at its core. And we can do a little practice match where no opponent is involved, that we stall for some reason, but I can go over the anatomy of a turn, basically, or an entire game. Whoops, didn't mean to actually queue up for a game here. I wanted to queue up for a practice match. Well, let's find our opponent and try to explain what's going on. So the first thing that you'll see is you'll see the cards that you draw at the beginning of the game, and it will ask you to mulligan your opening hand. So you look at the cards. These are the cards that you would start out with, and you would start out with 7 cards. And if you decide to mulligan, you'll just reshuffle your deck and draw 1 less card. So you would draw 6 cards, and you can do this over and over, but you would keep drawing 1 less card every time you do this. Or you can decide to keep your hand, and then your opponent does the same thing until both players decide not to mulligan anymore. So I like this. We have 2 resources available, and we have 2 cards that we can play with these 2 resources. We have another one available. Well, it's more of a late game card. Well, just for now, we keep this to not make this overly complicated. And then we see our opponent's life points, 20 is over here, and then my life points, 20 over here. And then these little things are basically the steps that make up one turn. First one's upkeep, then first main, second main, and end step, and in between is combat, should any occur. So you can play 1 land card each turn. Obviously, there are other cards that allow you to play more. As I said, Magic is a game of exceptions. And right now I have 1 resource in the game, and I could play things for that one resource, but I don't have any. So now I can play a second, because it's the second turn, I can play a second resource, and now I can play something that costs these 2 resources. So I have 2 planes that would give me 2 white colored mana. I mentioned the colors in the very beginning. And this Silverbeak Griffin, you can see, costs 2 white mana exactly. A Johnny's Pridemate on the other side would cost 1 white mana, and then another 1 mana, regardless of its color. So it could have not necessarily had to be another planes that I would have tapped for it. Like if I play a multicolored deck like my opponent, he's playing mountains and islands. For the Viashino Pyromancer, he needs to play at least, he needs to tap at least 1 mountain, and then the second mana can come from an island because it says it can be a colorless resource. And now we're in I don't have another land to play out. So what happened now is like we would go into the attack step where I say I can define attackers. So if a combat phase is defining attackers, defining blockers, and then combat damage. So I would choose my Silverbeak Griffin as an attacker, and he would automatically attack the life points of my opponent. I'd choose 1 attacker, and my Silverbeak Griffin is flying. On the right hand side you can see that a creature with flying can't be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach. And none of my opponent's creatures have flying, so he can't block. That's why it automatically resolved into dealing damage to my opponent. Then I have a chance to play another card because in my second main phase I played the Healer's Hawk, and what I'm counting on is this card has lifelink, meaning every time it deals damage to something I gain life, which interacts nicely with the Johnny's Pridemate, what says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on a Johnny's Pridemate. So as long as he doesn't shut down my Healer's Hawk, I intend to attack with it next turn while a Johnny's Pridemate is in play, and then the life that I would gain from my Healer's Hawk would get a +1/+1 counter on a Johnny's Pridemate. And that's already like fairly complicated to digest if you're absolutely new to the game. But that's basically what Magic is about. You have a basic set of rules, and then you have exceptions on almost all the cards that you play that alter the rules of the game, basically. So he played a sorcery, and he dealt 3 damage to my Silverbeak Griffin. Another card goes into my graveyard. This area down here is called the graveyard. This is where all the cards go by default after they're removed from the game. There's also something called the Exile, which would put cards on the right side of my library, and this is my library. If I have 50 cards left on my library, of course. So he has 2 blue mana. I'm gonna play a Johnny's Pridemate because I want to have them in the game when this guy deals damage, because they wouldn't get the +1/+1 counter while they're in my hand. So now this guy says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on a Johnny's Pridemate. So I intend to attack with my Healer's Hawk, and if my Healer's Hawk comes through and deals damage to my opponent, I gain 1 life, and the Johnny's Pridemate would get a +1/+1 counter. Well, so let's see what happens. There's a damage, there's a life, and then this is the effect triggered from the Johnny's Pridemate, and now it has a +1/+1 counter, making it more beefy. So that worked very well for me. Let's see what our opponent keeps doing. Now, blue and red are cards known for red for direct damage to creatures or opponents, and blue for counters, or putting things back into my hand. There we go. 4 damage to target creature. My Pridemate had a toughness of 3, which is less than 4, so he killed it outright. We didn't draw another land, so we can't play any of our cards. So I have 2 of these resources available, right? I have 2 planes, and then all my cards that I have in my hand require at least 3 resources to play. So I can't play any of these cards. They can't affect the game, basically, while they're in my hand, other than affecting my hand size. So what I intend on doing is just attacking with my Healer's Hawk, gain back 1 life, and then hoping that we would draw a land next turn so that we can get into our 3 resource spells. All the while he is chipping away at my life points. So we'll see how that goes. There's my planes. And now we have more options available to play. This guy, Kinjali's Sunwing, is a dinosaur, a flying one, and he says, creatures your opponent control enter the battlefield tapped. So I'm gonna attack with my Healer's Hawk. And the reason why I don't play the Sunwing outright is because I don't want to give my opponent information that I can play another card, basically. I want him to interact with my Healer's Hawk first. If he chooses to remove this creature from the game, I hope he doesn't have any means available to remove my Kinjali's Sunwing immediately. Because obviously this card is more valuable in terms of resources than my Healer's Hawk. So he did not choose to remove my Healer's Hawk. And now I choose to play my Kinjali's Sunwing, hoping that he doesn't have a counterspell available for the 2 blue he's playing. There's a counterspell, Bond to Ash, and it says counter target creature spell, draw a card. So for the 4 mana he had open, he countered my spell. My Sunwing went straight to the graveyard. It didn't enter the game or anything. And then yeah, that's we're basically donezo at this point. We don't have my opponent has 6 resources available. We only have 4. For these 4 resources we can play an instant that requires creatures in the game. So not much we can do at this point because we don't have creatures in the game. And we're basically, we didn't make any major mistakes other than maybe not taking a mulligan, but we also didn't get enough resources to get our cards into play before our opponent reached critical mass, basically. And by critical mass I mean dealing or having enough powerful creatures in the game that we can't turn the tides anymore. So he's just showing off at this point. There's nothing really we can do. We have nothing that would prevent us from surviving this turn, really, and then that's game. So I lost. My life points have been reduced to 0, so I got defeated. That's basically, that's Magic. So let's play a practice game and maybe do this a little slower. I'm gonna play the same deck just for not introducing any new variables to the game. But this practice node is basically against the computer, and we're not, while I explain stuff to you, we're not holding up another player from wanting to play the game, because he would just see me playing very slow without me having a chance to explain like why I'm taking so much time taking my turns. Alright, so what I did was I took a mulligan, and now this is my hand. 3 planes, Leonin Vanguard, Leonin Warleader, and a Shalai Voice of Plenty. And then, because I took a mulligan, I get to see the next card I would draw, and that's a Healer's Hawk, which is a card I like, and I want to have that so I can decide whether to put it on under my library or on top of my, leave it on top of my basic library, basically. So that's also called Scry. That's why it says Scry up here. So I'll leave him on top of my library, and I know exactly what I'm going to draw next. I can see it here if I mouse over. So because I start the game, I don't get to draw a card immediately. I just get to play with what I drew after my mulligan. So I play my planes, and then I have my Leonin Vanguard available. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures, Leonin Vanguard gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and you gain 1 life. So Leonin Vanguard is a 1 resource, 1/1 card, which in and of itself wouldn't be anything to write home about, let's say. But it has a nice rule exception. So if I control 3 creatures at the beginning of my combat step, it gets me life and it grows stronger. For at least until the end of turn. So I'm gonna attack with my Leonin Vanguard. The effect on the card doesn't trigger because I don't have, at the beginning of my combat step, I didn't have 3 or more creatures. So right now, at the beginning of my next combat, I would have 2 creatures. So for my next turn, I hope I will draw a land, or even better, I draw a 3 mana, at least 3 or less mana creature. So in theory, I would play my Silverbeak Griffin, the card that I just drew, after I attacked. But because I have Leonin Vanguard in play, I would get an effect at the beginning of my combat step. So I want this in play at the beginning of my combat, so I have to play him in my first main phase. There it is, Lenin Vanguard triggered. It's the beginning of my combat step. It got a +1/+1 counter, and I gained 1 life, so I have 21 life points now. There's actually no upper limit to life points. There's combinations in the game that they had been historically been combinations in the game where you combine all the exceptions on your cards in a way that would generate an infinite amount. Like there's a loop going on that would kept going, and you would basically theoretically be able to create an infinite amount of health point, not winning you the game unless you win by any other means. Just having a ridiculous amount of life points doesn't win you the game. There's also combinations in the game that would deal an infinite amount of damage. So if I have unlimited life points and my opponent can deal an unlimited amount of damage to me, I would still lose the game because my opponent would be able to reduce my life points regardless of how many I would have. Alright, so I don't want to attack with my Lenin Vanguard because he would be able to block it with a Field Creeper, but I can attack with my Healer's Hawk because it's flying, and as I said before, a creature with flying can't be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach. The Field Creeper has no rules exceptions. Its name is Field Creeper. You can play it for 2 mana of any color. That's what the 2 in the top right says. It's an artifact creature, Scarecrow, and it has 2 power, 1 toughness. And 2 power would beat my 2 toughness on the Lenin Vanguard, and I would basically defeat the Field Creeper, but he would be able to defeat my Lenin Vanguard, which would generate me at least 1 life. So far, the Field Creeper is not really a danger to me, so I choose to not attack with my Lenin Vanguard. I just choose to attack with my Healer's Hawk, and because my opponent doesn't have any means of blocking by a flying creature or a creature with a reach, it goes immediately to the damage step. So that's good. So what I want to do now is I still don't want to attack with my Lenin Vanguard. I'm not sure which one of these to play yet, so I'm going to want to attack with my Helos Hawk and my Silverbeak Griffin first. It's beginning of the combat. This one's triggers, so I get my life point. I'm at 23 now. I got my 22nd life point because my Helos Hawk dealt 1 damage, gaining me 1 life. I choose to attack with my 2 flying creatures. My opponent doesn't have any flying creature or creature with reach, so this attack cannot be blocked. I would deal 3 damage directly to the Thul's points. So he's down to 18, and then he has a couple of attackers on the board. This guy, when it's my opponent's turn, this guy shrinks down back to a 1/1, so I couldn't really block anything effectively. I could chump one of these guys, but then my Lenin Vanguard would die. But I have 2 creatures in my hand that I can play one of. One is a legendary called Shalai, Voice of Plenty, and it is also flying, which is nice. Your planeswalkers you control and other creatures you control have hexproof, meaning they can't be targeted of the spells of my opponent, which is really nice. But I'm feeling more like Lenin Warleader, although he could just black Lenin Warleader with all of his creatures, and that would just eat my Lenin Warleader up. So which one should we play? I'm thinking let's do the Lenin Warleader, because he would need to block it with at least the Shrine Keeper and the Field Creeper, or one of these and both cats to kill it. So I would get a good trade in, and also Lenin Warleader, when attacking, gets 2 1/1 white creature tokens with lifelink that are tapped in attacking. I'm gonna play my planes, and I'm not gonna attack with my Lenin Vanguard still, because he would just get eaten for no reason. But I choose to attack this way. So when he declares blockers, he can block my Lenin Warleader or any of the attacking cats that the Lenin Warleader produces. But he would have to attack, if he wants to get rid of Lenin Warleader and just not chump the damage, he would need to block with at least a combination of creatures netting a power of 4. So that's either both Field Creeper and Shrine Keeper, or any of the two and both Sanctuary Cats. So I would at least be able to use Lenin Warleader to kill 2 of his creatures. Yeah. If he decides to defeat Lenin Warleader to put it out of commission. So let's do that. This is the effect of my Lenin Warleader. These are the 2 cats that it produced. And now, because that's exactly what I predicted basically, Lenin Warleader gets blocked. Here you can see him. Lenin Warleader gets blocked by the Field Creeper and the Shrine Keeper. And I can now decide who I want to attach, or how I want to assign my damage. I want to first assign lethal amount of damage to the Field Creeper, and then I'm going to assign the remaining amount of damage that my Lenin Vanguard would do to the Shrine Keeper. Actually, the other way around makes probably more sense. There are spells in the game like Combat Tricks where you can buff up the creature so that this guy would have more toughness and I would need to deal more damage to it to kill it outright, but the fact that he blocked with at least 2 tells me that I'm gonna get at least 1 guy killed out of these. And then my cats get just eaten by their cats. There's one of those Combat Tricks. So tactical advantage. Oh, interesting. He chose to tactical advantage his cat for some reason. So a tactical advantage does, let's look at his graveyard. I can see at any point in the time I can look at the graveyard of my opponent. So he played Tactical Advantage, which is an instant spell, meaning he can not only play this while it's his turn, but he can also play this while it is my turn, which just happened. I was attacking, so it was my turn, but because it's an instant spell, he can just play this spell during my turn, which is nice. You can't do that with sorceries or creatures. There's also a ability that cards could have called Flash, which basically allows any card with Flash to be played during your opponent's turn, or outside of any main phase, really. By default, the basic rule set says that you can only play cards during your main phase, either the first main phase or the second main phase. So instant is basically an exception to that rule, that it says you can not only play a spell with the instant signifier during only your first or second main step. So anytime, really. So he chose to play Tactical Advantage, and Tactical Advantage says target blocking or blocked creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And he targeted his cat. So his 1/2 cat would turn into a 3/4 cat. Which, the interesting thing is, his 1/2 cat would survive my attack of my 1/1 cat, because it has 2 toughness and my cat only has 1 power. So he basically wasted the spell, turning it into a 3/4 cat that would have survived anyways. Interesting. Well, we're playing against the computer, so I don't know why he would do that. And then Shrine Keeper and Field Creeper are the 2 dudes that my Lenin Vanguard, Warleader, sorry, my Lenin Warleader killed because he dealt enough lethal damage. So here's my graveyard. Currently my graveyard is only occupied by Lenin Warleader. And then you can see there's damage on Sanctuary Cat, and there's damage on this Sanctuary Cat. This is the 3/4, so this is the guy that he chose to buff, basically, for seemingly no effect. Because as soon as my turn ends and his turn starts, this guy goes back to being a 1/2 Sanctuary Cat. It says until end of turn. So when my turn ends, the +2/+2 would be removed from this Sanctuary Cat. Alright, so there's nothing left really for me to do other than playing Shalai, Voice of Plenty, giving all my other cards hexproof, meaning they can't be targeted by spells of my opponent, and then that's it. So now we're back in the situation where we have flyers and my opponent doesn't, which means I'm in the comfortable situation to just select all my flyers and then be attacking with them. Meanwhile, Lenin Vanguard got us a +1/+1. We're already at 29 life. And we will reduce the life points of our opponent to 11. Now, annoyingly, our opponent has a Johnny's Welcome in game, meaning he gets a life point every time he plays a creature. So he chose to play a Sanctuary Cat, this guy, meaning he got 1 life point going from 11 to 12. And then he's attacking with the other 2 Sanctuary Cats he already had in play, reducing my life points from 30 to 28, which I really absolutely don't care about at this point in game. I got another Angel, Serra Angel. He's flying and has Vigilance. Now, you see, let's explain Vigilance real quick. The rules text or the hint on here reads, attacking doesn't cause a creature with Vigilance to tap, which we can infer from that every time a creature attacks, you basically need to tap it. That means you turn it on its side. That's what this little arrow on this card signifies. So if it has a little black shimmering on it like this guy has, it's actually called Summoning Sickness. So Summoning Sickness is something a creature that you play has the turn you played it. So it's your turn, you pay the cost for the card, you play your creature, it comes into play on the board. It has Summoning Sickness, meaning you can't tap it, like turn it sideways, the turn you played it. And in order to attack, you need to be able to turn your card sideways, meaning, like in result, that you can't attack with a card because you can't turn it sideways. So there are other things. I don't have anything like that. There are other things that require you to turn your card sideways, like for example a land. If you want to draw it from its power, or if you want to use it as a resource, you have to be able to turn it sideways also. Now, planes or lands in general don't have Summoning Sickness, but some non-basic lands, like these are basic lands called planes, but some non-basic lands, they come into play tapped, meaning you can't use them as a resource the turn you actually put them on the field. So little details like that make the game, like at its core, very intricate. We're in our first main stab. We have 6 resources available. Right now we would be winning if our opponent doesn't do anything to counter our attack. So we just keep attacking with these guys. I'm not playing Serra Angel for the fact that our opponent could hold something in his hand that's like a mass removal, meaning he would be able to remove all of my creatures or all creatures in general, meaning mine and his, from the game. There's cards that allow you to do that, and some of them start at 4 mana. So theoretically, any of these 2 cards my opponent is holding could be such a math removal if they were in the game. I'm not gonna block any of his cats with my Vanguard. He's dealing a puny 3 damage. I'm down to 27. Now here's another card that we didn't talk about much yet, or card type. See, it's called Take Vengeance. And it's costing 1 colorless or 1 mana resource of any color, really. Could be any color or no color. And then 1 white mana. It's a sorcery. A sorcery is the basic spell, so to say. You'll play it, it has an effect, and then afterwards it goes into your graveyard. Now this one reads, destroy target tapped creature. We talked about the concept of tapping earlier, where you turn your card sideways, and my opponent right now has 3 tapped cards in play, or creatures in play, which means any of these 3 Sanctuary Cats. That's why the game stacks them like that. These are all tapped, like they're... I always want to use the word exhaust, but exhaust is actually a different mechanic that we didn't get to yet. But he tapped them to use them for attacking. Remember when I said in order for being able to attack with a card, you need to be able to turn it sideways, meaning tap it. So he tapped these 3 cards to attack with them, and I could now play Take Vengeance on any of my main phases, my first or my second main phase, which would right now would be the only chances I would have to play a sorcery, because a sorcery has to be played by default in either of my first or my second main phase. But my opponent also only has 6 life points left. And if I count correctly, I have 1 power, 2 power, 3 power, totaling 6 power that I'm going to be hitting him with in a face. So I'm going to do exactly that. Nope, we're not going to attack him. And then, because he can't block any of these right now, he would die because I would reduce his life points to 0. Now, I'm not going to speak too soon just yet, because theoretically, or hypothetically spoken, our opponent has 2 cards left in his hand. These could be cards that he would be allowed to play during my turn, and they could have an altering enough effect on the state of the game that he doesn't lose right now. Theoretically, he would lose right now, but he still has 4 resources available, 4 mana available to play any of the 2 cards. He could play both, he could play only one, or he could play none of them, to alter the game, to introduce new rules or exceptions that would allow for him to not lose here right now. So we'll see what happens. He did not, and he lost. So his life points have been reduced to 0. We're not even going to a second main phase, we just win outright. So we're gonna do this once more in slow-mo. This time with a different deck. We're gonna make it a little bit more complicated. And we're gonna do different colors this time. Yeah, let's do this guy. This could get if this goes over your head right now as a beginner, that's absolutely no problem. This game has a little bit more sophistication, I guess, to it. It has a lot more effects to it, and it actually revolves around 1 or 2 themes, really. There's one keyword, or not one keyword, but there's one effect in the game called sacrifice. And sacrifice means that my creatures, or whatever I need to sacrifice, actually become a resource. And you'll see what that means like in a second. So this is an opening hand, mulligan, yada yada. That's the same every time we play a game. Now you can see I'm not playing white anymore, I'm playing red and black as a resource. So mountains and swamps. And I'm not sure if we will see a non-basic land type for an example, but what we see already, there's one type of spell that I didn't play in the game we just did before, which is called an enchantment. An enchantment is neither a creature, nor an instant, nor a sorcery, nor a land. It's just an effect that comes into play, and it doesn't necessarily need to attach to a creature. Typically auras attach to a creature, which are like permanent attachments that alter the creature itself, like they add exception to that one creature. Now this one actually affects the entire game. It reads, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So let's dissect that spelling, because we have the time. We're playing an opponent that has an infinite amount of time. He doesn't get upset from me explaining this to you. So whenever a non-token creature you control dies, meaning the creature which is not a token. So we didn't explain token just yet, but basically a token is something that is in the game that didn't come from my hand, if that makes any sense. So it's not a card, it's the result of an effect. And tokens, for example, can't go back to my hand. Like if I have a token creature in play and my opponent sends that creature back to my hand, that creature would just vanish because I can't hold a token in my hand. The tokens don't have a cost associated. They're like, strictly speaking, the result of a spell or a game-altering effect. So a non-token creature that I control, meaning it's on my half of the game, when it dies, meaning it has been dealt a lethal amount of damage, whenever that happens, this effect triggers, and as a result, it would create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So what does that do? It creates a token of type zombie. Just as these creatures are of type human and skeleton warrior, it would have the type zombie. It would be a creature, so it would say creature zombie, like this one says creature human. and it would have 2 power, 2 toughness, and it would be black. So this one is a black 1/1 skeleton warrior, and this would be a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Maybe you'll see that come into play. We'll see. So I talked about this theme when I started this game, and so the word sacrifice or token is used throughout the construction of this deck. So, for example, Doomed to Center is a 1/1 creature of type human for 2 mana, which is sort of expensive, but nothing unusual really. Plenty cards like that in the game, but when this guy dies, meaning when this guy is dealt a lethal amount of damage, so it goes into my graveyard, it has an effect that triggers at that point, which would result in me getting a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Now, if you recall, that's exactly the same thing as Open the Graves does. It creates a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Now, you can see where this leads, right? So, let's think of a game state where Open the Graves in the game, and my Doomed to Center is in the game. And now my opponent shocks. Let's say he has this red card, right? He shocks, he deals 2 damage to any target, meaning he shocks my Doomed to Center. This guy is a non-token creature, and it has a 1 toughness. If he deals 2 damage to this card, the card gets a lethal amount of damage, would be going to my graveyard, and in return, it would create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, right? Well, that's not quite the whole story, because if I have Open the Graves in the game, Doomed to Center is a non-token creature that I control, and then this effect creates another 2/2 black zombie creature token, which in return results me 2/2, or it results me 2 black zombie creature tokens with 2 power and 2 toughness. See where that's going? Alright, I hope that wasn't too much over your head. So let's keep this hand and just start playing, I guess. I'm going to be opening with a mountain because I have the shock available, and shock is an instant. So I have, like, these are the steps my opponent runs through, right? Before my turn starts, if I have a mountain in play, which would allow me to draw up 1 red mana resource, I could theoretically play shock at the end of his turn onto a creature that he might be playing in his first turn, my opponent, that is. So that's why I'm going to be opening with the mountain. So you see there's this blue border around this card, meaning I have enough resources available to play this card. But right now, the only target that I would be able to select would be my opponent directly. And that would basically be dealing 10% of his life points as damage, which at this point, I don't even know what colors my opponent is playing. So I choose to not do that and just forfeit my remaining turn and see what my opponent's coming up with. So he has a forest, and he plays Wall of Vines. Now here's a couple of new keywords: Defender and Reach. So Wall of Vines is the creature of type plant wall, and typically wall means this has the attribute Defender, and creatures with the Defender attribute cannot attack. They can only block, so he would not be able to deal damage. Now Wall of Vines, in addition, doesn't have any power, so it can block. It can block any of my creatures from dealing damage to my opponent directly and dealing damage to Wall of Vines instead. But in return, it would not deal damage to my creature unless he alters this creature further. But it had 3 toughness. And as I ended my turn, when I said I could shock the Wall of Vines, so the creature my opponent is playing, now it has 3 toughness. If I shock it, I only deal 2 damage, meaning I'm short 1 damage to actually remove this card or deal a lethal amount of damage to this card. So I have this stop at the end of his turn, which would be right now. And my shock doesn't help me much, basically, because it would just fizzle. It would deal damage to this, 2 damage to this card, but as soon as his turns end and my turn starts, the damage is going to be removed, and this is going to still be a 0/3 Defender Reach token creature. Now Reach means that he not only can block attackers regularly, but he can also block attackers as if though he had flying. A creature with reach can block creatures with flying. It doesn't fly itself, so it cannot attack as it has flying, but it can block as if it had flying. So let's just pass and start our turn, and then play another resource. So I'm going to choose the Swamp because I want to play either Doomed Dissenter or Reassembling Skeleton. And for that I need a Swamp, a black resource. And I think of playing my Reassembling Skeleton first, because my Reassembling Skeleton has a nice effect. You can see the rules text here says return Reassembling Skeleton from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. But it also says 1 mana of any color or no color and 1 black mana resource. And then a colon. The colon is important because before the colon come the cost to trigger this effect. And these abilities of cards can actually be triggered at instant speed, meaning anytime I could play an instant I could trigger this ability. Which is really nice, because if this guy dies and goes into my graveyard, and only if he's in my graveyard, I can actually trigger this ability by paying its cost and put this guy back onto the battlefield. It would be tabbed, like it would be sideways, as I explained like in the game earlier. It would still be sideways, but it would be back on the battlefield basically. So what we're gonna do now is not much. We're gonna play a mountain because we have 2 and no other land resource. And then if we attack with Reassembling Skeleton, that wouldn't make much sense right now. He has Greenwood Sentinel, and Greenwood Sentinel is an Elf Scout 2/2 with Vigilance, and in the very first game that we did, we had Angels in play that also had Vigilance, meaning they don't need to be actually flipped sideways when they attack. You would still need to be able for them to be flipped sideways, but they don't when they attack. So because they have Vigilance, they basically can attack without being flipped sideways, but you can't attack with them first turn because they still have Summoning Sickness. Now, there is a keyword in the game called haste, and you would find that typically on red cards. And what haste does is a card that comes into play that has haste doesn't have Summoning Sickness. Basically, you play it and you can attack with it outright. It would still flip sideways, but it doesn't have Summoning Sickness, so you can flip sideways for attacking. This guy has Vigilance. It works a bit different. Like, it comes into play, it still has Summoning Sickness, but when it attacks, it doesn't flip sideways. So you'll see, like, there's minute but important details. So I'm not going to attack with my Reassembling Skeleton. I'm just going to play my Doomed Dissenter so I get another body in play. And I have 1 mana left for Shock. Which is exactly what we're going to do at the end of our opponent's turn. We're going to shock the Greenwood Sentinel if he doesn't play anything more ridiculous. Now, glad I saved my shock, because here comes Daggerback Basilisk. Daggerback Basilisk is a 2/2, just a Greenwood Sentinelist, but instead of Vigilance, it has Death Touch. And Death Touch says, let's resolve it and put up the help on top here on the screen. Any amount of damage a sword with Death Touch deals to a creature is enough to destroy it. I mentioned a lethal amount of damage several times. And Death Touch basically kills a creature, kills anything it dealt damage to. It at least needs to deal 1 damage to it, which is enough for it to die or be removed from the battlefield. And you can see this is a 2/2 body, and by that I mean 2 power, 2 toughness for 3 mana, versus the Greenwood Sentinel is a 2 power, 2 toughness creature for just 2 converted mana, right? Converted mana is just counting up the amount of resources you need to spend to play this card. So 3 versus 2, right? 1 green, 1 colorless versus 1 green, 2 colorless. Meaning the effect of Death Touch. Otherwise, these cards are identical except for their playing for their effects they have, right? The attributes that are mentioned on them. Death Touch versus Vigilance. So you can see for the color green at least, Death Touch, which you can also find on black cards, for example, is increasing the cost of the card by 1 mana so it can have Death Touch. And Vigilance is not as expensive, really. So we can still pass. Well, let's see what our opponent chooses to attack with, because we can still block with our creatures, right? So if I click next, it would be my turn. So he didn't choose to attack, but what we're going to do now is we're going to play this instant, and we're going to zap the Daggerback Basilisk. And now it is still my opponent's turn. I played a spell at instant speed, meaning at the end of my opponent's turn, I use that one resource to play shock. And then now my turn starts actually. So now I have all my mana fresh available because all my spent resources rejuvenate. They untap basically. They become unspent. And now I have 4 resources available, which is enough, exactly enough. I need to spend 2 mana of any color or no color, and 2 red mana to play my Rekindling Phoenix. And you can see Rekindling Phoenix has a whole bunch of rule text on here. So let's look at this in detail. I'm going to play Rekindling Phoenix. There's nothing really my opponent can do about it because he doesn't have any resources available. He can't produce any mana of any kind. And you can see Rekindling Phoenix. So let's start dissecting this card from the top. It's called Rekindling Phoenix. We already went over the cost. It's a creature called Phoenix, and then the little golden, orangey, shimmering icon you can see. I can't move my mouse over here, but like it's right here. This icon means it's of type mythical. And I guess we haven't talked about rarity yet, but in Magic, when you buy card boosters, there's a certain amount of card in each booster, and then they're all of different rarities. There's common, uncommon, rare, and then there's mythical. So common cards you're most likely to find, and these are typically signified by this black icon over here. So M19 in black and white, that's a common signifier, meaning this card, if you buy booster packs of the Magic 2019 basic set, it's fairly common to find a card like the Doomed Dissenter or other cards of the common rarity. Now, Reassembling Skeleton has this shimmery, silvery, grayish, whitish demarcation. So same thing, this is M19 black-white, this is M19 in silverish black outline, meaning it's an uncommon. So if you were to open a booster pack, uncommon cards, there are only, I think, 2. There are at least a lot less uncommon cards in a booster pack than there are commons in a booster pack. And so if you're looking to get a Reassembling Skeleton, your chances are very low to get a Reassembling Skeleton out of one booster pack. Or, yeah, you'll only find very few uncommons to begin with, and then amongst all uncommons in that series, it had to be Reassembling Skeleton. And then you would have rares, which would be a yellow goldenish demarcation, and this one has a orange yellow goldenish mythical rarity. So there's only ever going to be 1 rare or 1 mythical in a booster pack, with an exception. So each pack you open with, out of, I think there are 15 cards in there, 10 commons, 4 uncommons, 1 rare or mythical. Now, there's only 1 rare in there, And for that rare to be exactly the one card that you're looking for, it's highly unlikely that's going to happen. So you got to be really lucky that that's the card you're looking for. So that's where the whole trading part comes into play. Anyways, that one slot for rares and mythicals is most likely a rare, because mythicals are even more seldom, right? So you see where that leads to, like the whole like rarity thing, like cards get rarer. And the more rare a card is, the more sought after they are typically, and the more significant their game-altering effect is. Now, I mentioned one exception. I had this happen to me back in the day when we were playing Friday Night Magic. And I mentioned that earlier, the foil cards. These are like the shimmery ones. Amongst the 15 cards in the booster pack, one of them can be a foil card, meaning it can have this like foil printed layer making it look all shiny and shimmery, and that card can be of any rarity. So it could be a foil common, it could be a foil uncommon, and a foil rare or mythical. Now, I had this happen to me during a draft where I opened a pack and I browsed to the cards. I had 9 commons only, not 10. I had 4 uncommons, and I had 1 rare. I think it was a Wrath of God, which is one of those board wipe, remove all creature cards, which was a rare card back then. And then the 1 common that was missing was actually a shiny Wrath of God. So I had 2 rare cards in 1 booster pack, with one of them being the shiny version of the other. So it's not said there's only ever going to be 1 rare only. It's highly likely that there's only 1 rare or mythical in your booster pack, but it's not guaranteed. Anyways, let's get into Rekindling Phoenix. So this creature is flying. It's a 4/3 body, 4 power, 3 toughness, which in and of itself for 4 mana is already pretty decent. Right, anyways. And then let's get into the text, read it out loud first, and then dissect it. When Rekindling Phoenix dies, create a 0/1 red elemental creature token with, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature and return target card named Rekindling Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until end of turn. That's a whole bunch of text. And that's a whole bunch of text for the reason that it actually calls out the text on a different card, or on the token that it generates. So when Rekindling Phoenix dies, means when any time when this guy would be removed from the battlefield to the graveyard during any phase really by battle damage or a spell, I get a 0/1 red elemental creature token. It has 0 power, 1 toughness, and it would be of type elemental. It would be a creature elemental, creature-elemental, just as this one says creature phoenix. And then that token has its own rules text, which is in the card at the end here. So it reads out, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature and return target card named Rekindling Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until end of turn. So that's the text on the token. Which means my upkeep is basically the phase before my first main phase, where I have to pay resources where they have constant effect, or all, like at least all my resources become available to me, at the very least. And then when I have this token in play, I hopefully have Rekindling Phoenix in the graveyard, because that token gets removed, and then from my graveyard I need to pick a card called Rekindling Phoenix. Now why do I say hopefully? Well, you see, when this creature dies, it comes back next turn because of its token effect, right? But if that token gets removed, meaning it never survives to reach the beginning of my upkeep, this effect doesn't trigger, because I have to have this token in play at the beginning of my upkeep. Or I have this token, it gets sacrificed, But then, for some reason, Rekindling Phoenix is not in my graveyard anymore because my opponent affected my graveyard by a certain spell. That would mean Rekindling Phoenix would not come back. And that would be very sad. But that's not the game. So that's basically how you dissect this card and digest its meaning. Whoopsie. Let's think about what we're doing here. It's our turn. We can't attack with Rekindling Phoenix. We choose to not attack because basically all of these would just be chumped by... would not be chumped. These would be eaten by the Greenwood Sentinel, or at least any damage would be prevented by Wall of Vines. So no attacks. But we most certainly hope for a swamp next turn. So our opponent has now 2 Greenwood Sentinels and the Highland game. We did get another mountain, so we cannot play Open the Graves, because Open the Graves requires us to play 3 mana of, or to pay 3 mana of any color or no color, and 2 black mana. Currently I can only generate 1 black mana, but by means of this swamp. So I have no way of generating that second black mana required to play Open the Graves, even though I have 5 resources available, right? I have 1 swamp and 4 mountains, but not in the right combination, so I can't play this card. So we're 1 turn later, and Rekindling Phoenix is in the game. The only card that would be able to block Rekindling Phoenix would be Wall of Vines, because it has Reach, which allows it to block as though it had Flying. But Wall of Vines doesn't deal any damage to Rekindling Phoenix, and right now my opponent doesn't have any resources available, meaning he doesn't have any forests open or other means of generating mana to play a combat trick, or meaning an instant spell, to alter Wall of Vines to be able to deal lethal damage to Rekindling Phoenix. So I'm pretty safe attacking with Rekindling Phoenix. Now my opponent can really do 2 things that I see here. He can choose to block with Wall of Vines, which would kill Wall of Vines and deal no damage to my Rekindling Phoenix whatsoever, or he can just choose to get 4 in the face. And he chose the latter. So he's down to 16. Rekindling Phoenix is now tapped, which means I don't have it available for blocking, but it would untap in my upkeep. I still have these 2 bodies available for blocking. Alright, so we drew the Gravewalker. Gravewalker is a flyer with a 5/5 body, which is ridiculous for flyers, but it also has a hefty mana cost associated with it. Now, right now we are having the same... we have the amount, the converted amount of mana required to play this, but not in the right combination. This one also requires 2 black mana out of the 6 it costs in total, and we have 6, but only 1 of them is a black resource. So we can't play either of these cards until we're able to generate a second black mana, meaning hopefully we draw a second swamp eventually. So same thing as before, didn't really change much. He played a Field Creeper, which doesn't alter the game too terribly in his favor. And then we keep attacking. Now, what happened now is that he had enough resources available to play a Root Snare. And as I said before, I can look at my opponent's graveyard anytime I want to. So let's look at Root Snare. Root Snare costs 1 mana of any color or no color and 1 green mana, and it prevents all combat damage that will be dealt this turn. So when I'm about to do the damage, just before that happens, he can play this card and he can just say no combat damage this turn whatsoever, neither to my opponent, like to his face, or any of the creatures he chose to block with. And any effect that requires combat damage to happen basically wouldn't trigger. So we draw a card called Act of Treason. Act of Treason allows me to gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. So I basically, for these 3 mana, if I chose to play this card, I can gain control of any of my opponent's cards, regardless of whether it had Summoning Sickness or not. Because it becomes haste, I would be able to attack with it. And because it says until end of turn, I would have to give it back to my opponent at the end of my turn. So when his turn starts, he would get his creature back, basically. And there's some nice synergies with other cards that I have that allow me to sacrifice creatures. So what typically happens is that I gain control of one of my opponent's creatures. I attack or don't based on the state of the game, but then I would sacrifice the creature I gain control of so my opponent doesn't get it back. And whenever I sacrifice a creature, I get, like, as part of a cost of an effect, basically, I get the advantage of not having to sacrifice one of my own creatures, but one of my opponent's creatures. And maybe we draw up cards like that for the remainder of the game. We have at least 4 turns left, I think. Meaning I need to attack 4 more times with Rekindling Phoenix. Now 3 more times for this game to end, to be able to reduce the life points of my opponent to 0. Now, sacrificing a creature as part of the costs is actually not that expensive, so to say, anymore for me, because I can sacrifice this creature, and because when it dies, you know, I get this token, and the token brings back the creature. I basically don't need to sacrifice the creature. The one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to sacrifice the token that this Phoenix generated, because then it wouldn't come back, right? So I drew a card called Murder, which I can play as well. And why is that? Well, we talked about this several times now. It requires 2 black resources and I only have 1 available to me. I can destroy at any point in time, really, because it's an instant speed spell. I can choose to destroy a target creature. So I choose a creature, could be mine, could be his, or could be mine, could be my opponent's, and that creature would be destroyed. So for now, we just keep attacking until we draw a second swamp, or my opponent's life points are reduced to 0. Sorry if I keep hitting my microphone. So my opponent really doesn't shows. My opponent really chooses to do nothing. Right? He doesn't attack. He just plays his cards. He has his cards. He has 1 card in hand left. He chose to play Dagger Basilisk, which we shocked, and then Root Snare, which prevented damage. But that doesn't really alter the game enough for him to swing it in his favor. We drew Rixmati Reveler, and Rixmati Reveler is here only because I like it. It's a rare card. You can see it has this like goldenish, yellowish hue demarcation for rarity. Has a super nice artwork. I like it. And it has Spectacle. Spectacle is another keyword, and by now you probably have read it. You may cast a spell for its spectral cost rather than its mana cost if an opponent lost life this turn. So, 2 things here that are at least noteworthy. First, if an opponent lost life this turn. So, I need to be able to deal damage to my opponent, either by combat or by a spell like Shock. And only then I would be able to play the alternate mana cost, like the Spectacle cost, right? Which here are like super expensive compared to its base cost. But then the rules text of the card actually refers to the Spectacle cost, right? So if I play it for its regular cost, I would get a 2/2 for 2, which is fine. But then if I play it for its Spectacle cost, I get a 2/2 for 4, but if Rixmati Reveler's Spectacle cost was paid, instead I discard a card, then draw 3 cards. I discard my hand and draw 3 cards. So, let's start over. When Rixmati Reveler enters the battlefield, discard a card, then draw a card. Right? So I play this card, I throw a card in the graveyard, and I draw a new one. If Rixmati's Reveler's Spectacle cost was paid, instead I discard my entire hand, and then draw 3 cards. Now, at this point in time, is really actually the good point in time where I want to draw this card. Like, I want to draw this, like, midway through the game, or let's say when I have only 1 card or no cards left in my hand besides Rixmati Reveler. Right now I have 4 cards in hand, so I don't really need to discard. I don't really want to discard my entire hand, because what I really want to do, or what I try to achieve with this card, is that I draw it midway through the game or early on and just save it. And then I play all my other cards on my hand, which right now I can't because I don't have the resources or the game doesn't give it. But let's say I have no cards in my hand besides Rixmati Reveler. I deal combat damage to my opponent, and then I have enough mana available to pay its Spectacle cost, which is likely because it's midway through the game. And then when it comes to instead discard your hand, well, my hand's already discarded because I don't have any cards left in my hand, right? or I only have cards in my hand that benefit from being in my graveyard. Like, I could have, theoretically, Reassembling Skeleton in my hand, and because of its effect, I could return it from the graveyard to the game anytime I want to, really. So it wouldn't really be that much of a loss. So that's really what I want to do with this card. So I draw 3 cards, and then instead of no cards after playing this, I have 3 cards instead of 1, right? If I can't discard a card and draw 1, I have 1 card. If I don't discard my hand because I have no cards in hand and draw 3 cards, I have 3 cards in the end, 3 cards. So that's really why this card is in the deck here. Right now I can choose to discard a card. I don't really feel like discarding any of my cards. So we'll just keep attacking, I guess. And then if nothing really serious happens next turn, we'll just win. The effect that you just saw here was the Spectacle effect, meaning I now have dealt damage to my opponent and could be able to pay the Spectacle cost of Rix Muddy Reveler, right? And okay, so right now I wouldn't do this because I didn't need to. I'm controlling the game. I have plenty of alternatives in my hand that I can play for game situations like Act of Treason and Murder. Perfect. But just to show you guys like what happens, I will now choose to play this Reveler's Spectacle cost, so I get this in the game, but I will lose my entire hand, right? So I can choose to play this for Spectacle cost. And now the effect comes into play. I discard all my cards and I draw new cards, which now would allow me, because I haven't laid down a land yet, to lay down another land, and now I would have finally enough resources available to play all the other cards that I just dumped into the graveyard, right? So at this point he has to block with Wall of Wines, and I'm a little bit afraid that he has a combo trick to boost Wall of Wines to a degree where it kills Rekindling Phoenix, but then not really that much concerned because Rekindling Phoenix can just come back at the beginning of next turn. So first thing I typically do is play a land, because that doesn't really give away too much information at this point. He already knows I'm playing black and red. And then we don't need to play Goblin Instigator right here because it doesn't alter the game enough to prevent them from blocking my Rekindling Phoenix, really, so we'll just attack. Nope. I always click all attackers by default, really. So, as I said, he's gonna block with both of them because I'm gonna be able to only kill one of them right now. I have 4 damage available to me, and he has a total toughness of 6, which I can't come up with in order to get all of these removed from the game, but that my opponent doesn't know that, right? So I have 2 cards and all my mana resources available to me, so it's, for my opponent, it looks like I have enough combat tricks available to me to be able to alter the game state, basically. So that's why he blocks with both, so that I'm not removing one of them. Okay, so he has Titanic Growth, one of the combat tricks. And what Titanic Growth does is that it gives a creature +4/+4 until end of turn. So you can play that anytime really, and until the end of the turn that creature is +4/+4, meaning it gains an additional 4 power and 4 toughness. Meaning he pumped up one of his Wall of Wines, the one that we didn't damage. Which is odd. Well, anyways. To make it a 4 power, 7 toughness creature, which obviously 4 power is enough to come over 3 toughness of my Rekindling Phoenix. We traded blows and Rekindling Phoenix died, one of the walls died. And then because of the effect of Rekindling Phoenix, we now have a token in play, which is a token creature elemental. And we said all that when we explained the creature before, the Rekindling Phoenix. And now it has all this rule text shenanigans going on here, right? So we'll see. In order for this effect to come into play, this token has to survive until the beginning of my turn, which is called my upkeep. Right? So at the end of the turn, now it's my opponent's turn, and as soon, so he doesn't really have anything. Oh, he draws a card, which is another, no, he returned the card from his graveyard, so he had another Titanic Growth in hand. And now at the beginning of my turn, the effect of my elemental comes into play, where basically this token gets sacrificed, and I have to look into my library where I can find a card named Rekindling Phoenix, right? And then that card would come into play with haste, so that I can use it again. So it now has haste and flying. It only has haste until end of turn, right? So until on the next turn, it doesn't require haste really. So let's see what happens next. He has another Titanic Rose, so I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to attack with Rekindling Phoenix. He's going to use Wall of Vines to block Rekindling Phoenix. Then he's going to cast Titanic Growth to kill my Rekindling Phoenix. His Wall of Vines will survive because it has 7 toughness. And I would get my token again. Well, or it doesn't, and he just lost the creature. Which I don't understand. Well, we don't know what he drew. So he drew Eldritch Rejuvenator. He has no flying card. Meaning, on the next attacking phase, I will attack with Rekindling Phoenix, and he has no creature available to him that can block Rekindling Phoenix. And because he doesn't have a blocker, this card is basically useless in his hand now. He didn't choose to attack to buff up his damage, and he can't block, so he can't buff up his blocker. So our opponent made a couple mistakes here, and that just wins the game. So I hope after this, what, hour now? Yeah, hour and about 20 minutes. I hope this explained a lot more in detail the anatomy of the cards, and also a bit of like how the game functions technically wise. I'm gonna go grab something to drink real quick because my throat's really dry. Be right back. we're back. Why did I choose to remove? Nope, I have music on, but doesn't seem like there's any music playing really. Is this chirping sound background music? Anyways, we're gonna do 2 more games, maybe-ish. So we need to do 1 more win to get these 100s. We cast green or white spells and kill 15 of our opponent's creatures. So let's have a look at green and white deck that comes with the game. Aura's Majesty. And I don't think I altered this deck yet beyond putting my digital copy of the foils in. So let's have a look at it right now. It has a decent mana curve. So this like bell pear shape, whatever you want to call it. It has an average mana cost of 3, which is nice. Not too expensive. It has a whole bunch of druids and humans. Wow, it's very heavy on enchantments. So it has more enchantments basically. Well, no. Yeah, it has more enchantments than it has creatures in the deck. So that's why it's called Auras of Majesty. Meaning we'll play a creature basically, and then we'll attach an enchantment to it. And I'm not really a big fan of that, and I will tell you exactly why. Because there's a thing called card advantage. And it's basic math. I can play 1 card, which is my creature. I have that creature in the battlefield. And then I play the enchantment, right? Which now needs to have which now needs to be the aura, and which now needs to be attached to a creature that I control. Now here's the crux. And there are several means available to my opponent. My opponent manages to get rid of the creature while I play my aura. The aura has no target anymore and just fizzles because I can't re-choose a target for it, right? After I chose my target, he removes my creature. Both my creature and my aura are gone. And my opponent basically, most likely, only spent 1 card for me to lose 2. So I'm down 1 card and he has a 1 card advantage over me. Or let's say that he doesn't do that and I have now a creature with an enchantment on it, with an aura on it, which also would be an enchantment, and it dies to another game effect, then that my opponent played from a card. I'm still down that 1 card, right? I'm still down that 1 card advantage my opponent now has over me. So because enchantments are attached to a creature, they are removed from the game when the creature gets removed from the battlefield. They're removed from the battlefield when the creature gets removed from the battlefield. They just don't stay and they get to choose a new target or something. Artifacts, on the other side, I can attach similarly to an enchantment or an aura to a creature, but then when the creature that the artifact is equipped with dies, the artifact just lies there on the battlefield, and I most likely have the means of attaching it to another creature that comes into play. So that's why I'm, in theory, like to play artifacts over enchantments. Now, there are a lot fewer artifacts available in the game, and the effect of an artifact, because they have this more persistent nature, the effect of an artifact is far less powerful for the same amount of resources that I have to spend over an enchantment. So I have actually not played this before, and it's probably not a deck that I'm going to be playing very much, but for today we're going to cast 30 green spells or white spells, which is all of the cards in our deck, and we hopefully manage to eke out 1 win to get our reward, and in the process kill 15 of our opponent's creatures, which 6 we already killed. So let's just see how that goes. We need to go into regular play mode. We want to play Auras of Majesty and then play. Now, I don't know if we will see this during our playthrough, but there's one card type in here that we haven't talked about yet, and you haven't even named yet. We named Planeswalkers briefly, which is another creature type, card type, but there's also a Saga in this deck, which is a special type of enchantment. We don't have much. But we'll keep. We'll just see how the deck turns out. I need 3 resources in the game to play Denethor Capassion, and she actually makes equipments and auras a lot cheaper to play. So we'll play. This is a non-basic land. Like further in the stream, I mentioned non-basic lands, and this land also comes into play tapped, so it's already a resource not available to me in the turn I play this land. But the advantage, like the trade-off, is that it can produce either a green or a white mana. Satyr Enchanter. Right, so I'll see the theme, but my opponent is ramping up quite good. So we'll have to hurry, basically. And now, since I can't play anything anyways for the resources I would have available, I'll just play the resources that come into play tapped anyways, because I can't really spend them for anything right now. So opponent is doing a half the amount of damage already to our life points before we even have the first creature. We're gonna play the Satyr Enchanter, and the reason for that is that it has a nice effect that allows me to draw a card. It has an okay-ish body, but if my opponent who plays black has a removal spell available, I want him to remove my Satyr Enchanter first over Denethor. They have the same body, right? But Denethor I currently value a lot higher than the Satyr Enchanter. Yeah, that would be 5 damage. We are not gonna block this because I hope to gain the life points I lost back, or stole the game enough with Denethor and an attached enchantment. So now that's what happened. He strangled that poor little guy. Yeah, hope that he doesn't have another removal available, which is unlikely, so it's likely that he has one. But we could stall out the game. We cannot stall out the game any longer. So he'll deal 7 damage. We're not gonna block any of these guys because they're death touch. Yikes. So we're gonna block this dude. And then he has probably more combat tricks available for that 1 mana. Yeah. And we lost the game. But we've also been fairly late to anything. Alright, so much for that. We didn't even kill 1 creature, but we cast some green and white spells. Let's see if we are able to eke out a win with this deck list that comes from that came with the game, basically. So if you want to do the same thing, right, you can just play the game, go through the tutorial, and then unlock the same deck list. That took surprisingly long, or unexpectedly long, to find an opponent. It typically doesn't take 30 seconds. Okay. We mulligan, we don't really have anything to play, that's even worse. We keep this because mulligan down further is nothing I want to do. Not very keen off. So we're gonna do Thorn Lieutenant into Knight's Pledge for now. It looks like it's a mirror matchup. Our opponent has the same card that we have in our deck. And he has the same colors of resources available to him. Let's change that and show him the exact same mirror matchup. I'm gonna mute him here. Just let him know nice. And then he has not played an enchantment yet, so we're gonna do that now. So that we're able to attack with this creature. And he just eats it. So this is a mirror matchup, as far as I can tell. We rendered my card. Useless, really, with Luminous Bonds. Can neither attack nor block. It's still in the game, like it's not removed dead or anything, but I can't really use it for much. I'm trying to figure out which combination I want to play this, because I can't play the Oaken form and any of these two really, and I would like to have a blocker. If I play this dude, I could attack with them without having to tap it. So this way I can bring both of those guys into play. If I attack, he would just die to first strike. But next turn I can Oaken form the Greenwood Sentinel and attack with them without having to tap. No, this is the only reason we're not dead yet is because our opponent has less mana available than we have. Like, he's not drawing his lands, but he's drawing all of his other good stuff. We on the opposite have one more land available than he has. I'm not gonna block here. So now we will be attaching that to the Sentinel and draw an additional card. And then we will attack, not having to tap that guy for the attack. So it leaves us open, this guy open as a blocker. and then next turn we have enough for Prodigious Growth or Thorn Lieutenant. Which we can choose to pump. If it gets blocked, becoming a 6/7. Or choose to make this a 9/9 Trampler. And then just attack this way. So let's hope he doesn't have 12 damage. He's still not drawing any land. Well, he'll gain back a whole bunch of life. So that's good for us. We will basically Luminous Bonds rendering. So this is ultra card advantage now. I got to play one card to disable 3 of his, right? So this is what I mean when I say card advantage. Maybe this dude has the same quest that we have, where he needs to play green and white spells to get the reward, the quest reward. I'm happy that the stream's working again. Yesterday I tried fidgeting around with the settings, and I would get dropped frames, making the experience for you guys unbearable. Regardless of what settings I chose, like I would reduce the settings beyond super ugly, and it would still drop frames for some reason. So let's see what happened here. He has 2/2 White Knight creature token. This guy has Vigilance, and then it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. Oh yeah, that's true. 2/2 Vigilance. We're gonna be eating that. No blockers. If he had a tactical advantage right there, we would have lost, but we also have lost right now. Meaning that we don't deal enough damage. This guy doesn't trample, and this guy can't attack. So in order to then, these two have to be dealing enough damage. And basically the only reason, or the only way I can see myself winning this is that the Satyr Enchanter doesn't get blocked by enough toughness to eat up all the trample damage, which now he does. And then the Lieutenant, nope, he lost. He lost by his own accord, because what happens now is that I buff this dude, and it's good game. He would have needed to block both of these. Well, That's our win. Our victory. He basically made a mistake by not blocking the card that I could buff for the mana to give it +4/+4. It would deal 2 damage to him, would have left him with 1 life, but because I buffed it, it dealt enough damage to kill him outright. Kill 15 of your opponent's creatures. So I guess we just keep doing that. We'll do this deck one more time and then maybe switch, because this deck doesn't really deal damage to creatures directly. It disables my opponent's creatures by trapping them in enchantments instead of killing them. So that doesn't help really with the quest. All of this is like so ridiculously expensive. Okay. Okay, yes, keep all that, please, thank you. So not a mirror matchup, but black again. That's a pretty good card. I'm not gonna choose to block because it looks very likely that he has a combat trick or anything to boost Diagraph Ghoul or deal damage to Novice Knight afterwards, after I blocked. So instead I'm gonna be putting up this guy, hoping that I draw an enchantment, I guess. That it's cheaper than Knightly Valor. Okay, so both of these come into play tapped, so it doesn't really make a difference which one we choose. We can't attack with this guy, and this guy would die, so we choose not to attack. Instead, pass into our second main phase, and then play the Daybreak Captain for the remaining of our resources. Which means last turn he played a land and didn't do much. Arcane Encyclopedia. 3, draw a card. Okay. He gets to draw a card for 3 mana. At this point we can Luminous Bonds the Diagraph Ghoul, which I don't know if that's worth it. I don't know if that's worth it. Let's see what happens when we attack with Daybreak Captain. Our card shouldn't die, but we gain a life. Alright, there's the combat trick that we were waiting for, basically. Reducing... Pilfering Imp. Okay. It starts to get interesting. Okay, so now we need to make a decision. We probably want this enchantment. And gets Vigilance, so we want to do the enchantment on the knight. And then we're going to be attacking with said knight. Because he has Vigilance. Vigilance. So at this point he might be choosing between playing Combat Trick and drawing a card. He can still draw a card, yeah. And he can sack Pilfering Imp to remove any card on my hand that is not a land. So this is the enchantment type that we haven't talked, or that we talked about the last time. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. So we're gonna be sacrificing this knight. We're gonna be playing both of our cards, because the next turn it says each opponent discards a card, and rather than discarding a card, I would choose to play it. We're gonna attack with both of our dudes, because I'm fine with being blocked by the Diagraph Ghoul. Gets one more blocker out of the way. Yep, we cannot discard a card because we don't have one. Then put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard. So you can choose the Diagraph Ghoul or the Greenwood Sentinel or Daybreak Captain. So he could choose any of these three creatures basically, unless he manages to get another good one into the graveyard. So I guess he'll just choosing any of these two. We keep our Greenwood Sentinel because it has vigilance basically. So now he will choose the Gravedigger if he's smart. Which had the best. Nope. Ah, it doesn't trigger the effect again. Well, that's. It does trigger the effect, but he doesn't have a creature in his graveyard. Haha, that's why. Okay. Let's do another Knightly Valor to enable our second Novice Knight to attack. And attack like that. He still can eat any of them, but he gets 2 zombies, which is fine with me, because we'll just do the same thing next turn. Yeah, lots of recursion, meaning he can dig us into his graveyard with this mana. We don't really need more mana resources right now. We can't win the game by attacking right now because he has a 5/5 blocker that we need to get rid of. So we hopefully draw one of those Hierophant Cages, which will hopefully be able to get rid of the Gravewalker. He figured out ultimately that he can still use his Imp's ability. So we can now might as well play that card because he knows we have it. We still can't attack really. Up, draw a card if I were you. So let's see how the game turns out, because at this point I'm really on the backside of the game. Just due to the Gravewalker, which I need to disable. I need that mana to potentially rescue Thorn Lieutenant. Ah, one of those guys again. He did not choose to attack. Perfect. Luminous bonds this dude. And attack with these two. Good card advantage. He used one card to get rid of two of mine. He doesn't get much out of these, other than like... Sure, why not have a second one? I guess I have to draw another Luminous Bonds, or a Hieromancer's Cage. Fine with me. You could still use the ability of Gravewalker. He might not know that. Check in my graveyard. Good choice. Now, the good thing about these enchantments is that these cards don't get into anyone's graveyard right now, so you're not able to get them back using Gravedigger or anything that returns stuff from the graveyard. Which is fine. And he's building up a zombie army. I'm gonna do Knight's Pledge the Thorn Lieutenant. And then attack with the Thorn Lieutenant and hope he doesn't know we can buff it. So he gets 2 more zombies. And then he just plays something that says all zombies are super stupid and we lost. He has 14 damage just in zombies. Another card advantage card. He gets 1 card on the board and I lose 2. And that's game. Oh. Yeah, sure. Yikes. Nice. Let's see if he has a murder in hand. Yep, that's it. Well, we dealt enough damage to claim our price. And that's it for me for today, folks. Please like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff if you liked the stream. If you didn't, don't. And I hope to see you next time with some more Magic the Gathering. See ya.